Olivia stood in front of the ornate vanity mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the lace straps of her wedding gown. The sunlight spilling through the Florida Bay windows made the satin shimmer, but it did little to warm the knot in her stomach. She forced a deep breath, the kind brides were supposed to take before their perfect day. But her mind drifted elsewhere. Memory fragments of whispered messages, stolen glances, and a guilt she could barely admit to herself. "Olivia, are you ready?" Her mother's voice, crisp and cheerful, echoed down the hallway. "In a minute," Olivia replied, her tone tighter than intended. She could feel the sweat forming along her hairline, despite the ocean breeze wafting through the room. Every detail had to be flawless. The flowers, the sand-colored aisle, the pastel decorations. But perfection had never been her solace. The secret she carried clung to her like a shadow, sharp and unrelenting. Across the room, Daniel leaned casually against the doorframe, his tailored suit immaculate. His eyes, the kind that noticed everything, flickered toward her, scanning for signs of nerves. A small, reassuring smile tugged at his lips. "You look beautiful," he said, voice low, almost intimate. Yet behind his warmth, Olivia sensed a subtle weight, an observation, a quiet questioning that she could not entirely escape. "Thank you," she whispered, forcing a smile. The words felt brittle, like fragile glass she feared would shatter if handled too roughly. Daniel stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. For a moment, she wanted to melt into his embrace, to feel the normalcy of a couple about, to start a life together. But then, her gaze dropped to the ring on her finger, a glinting reminder of promises made and broken, of desires buried beneath layers of obligation. The beach outside was alive with soft whispers of waves and the distant laughter of guests settling into the chairs along the shoreline. Sunlight danced across the gentle ripples, and the pastel sky hinted at the promise of a perfect day. Cinematically, the scene was flawless. Sand untouched, except for carefully arranged footprints. White petals scattered like confetti, and the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. Yet beneath this picture-perfect moment, tension pulsed quietly, an invisible current threatening to break the fragile illusion. Olivia's thoughts wandered to Jake, the best man, a familiar presence in her life whose smile always seemed to linger in the corners of her mind. She shook her head, attempting to push away the guilt, but it clung stubbornly, twisting the excitement into a knot of anxiety. Every laugh, every touch from Daniel carried a whisper of danger, a reminder that the truth could surface at any moment. Daniel straightened, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. "You okay?" he asked, concern threading through his tone. I'm fine," Olivia replied, though her voice barely masked the flutter of panic in her chest. Her mother called again, insisting it was time to leave. Olivia took one last glance at the mirror, at the face she would present to the world, smiling, radiant, and unsuspecting. A deep breath, one step at a time. She could pretend today was perfect. She had to, but the undercurrent of secrets, barely contained, promised that this idyllic beginning might not last. As she stepped toward the waiting car, Daniel's hand brushed hers, a tender gesture, but one that also carried silent vigilance. The wedding awaited, beautiful and fragile, with the ocean as witness, and already the invisible cracks had begun to form. The chapel was bathed in soft morning light, streaming through stained glass like liquid gold. Olivia's heels clicked against the polished wooden aisle, each step measured, deliberate, a performance of composure she did not feel. Guests murmured greetings, their faces painted with joy, but her eyes kept flicking toward Daniel. He stood at the altar, hands clasped, posture perfect. Yet there was a subtle rigidity in his shoulders. His gaze followed her, scanning each hesitant step, as if trying to read secrets written across her skin. The ceremony began with music swelling around them. The priest's voice, calm and measured, called them to unity, to promises meant to last a lifetime. Olivia's heart pounded, not just with excitement, but with the anxiety of carrying a secret she could not yet name aloud. Memories of Jake's lingering touch and the clandestine smiles haunted the edges of her mind. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet Daniel's eyes, to offer a smile he would not question. "Do you, Daniel, take Olivia to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest intoned. "I do," Daniel said, firm, steady. Yet there was a flicker of something else. Observation, a subtle weighing of her every reaction. Olivia felt it, an almost imperceptible pressure, like the quiet tightening of a noose. When it was her turn, she hesitated, just for a breath. I do," she managed, her voice trembling ever so slightly. The words were true in part, but the hidden fracture beneath them pulsed like a secret heartbeat. She could not silence. Seated at the back, Jake's presence was an invisible shadow. He smiled, just barely, a smile that was private, almost conspiratorial. Olivia's stomach twisted at the sight. The knowledge that Daniel might notice, that he might feel the faintest unease, made her pulse race. The vows were exchanged, the rings slipped onto fingers, and the priest's blessing floated over them like a fragile promise. Guests clapped, some whispering about how radiant the couple looked, how the ceremony seemed pulled straight from a storybook. Yet within Olivia, the tension coiled tighter. The perfection of the moment, the idyllic Florida sunlight, the soft fragrance of salt and flowers, it all felt dangerously fragile, like glass suspended over a canyon. After the ceremony, photographs were taken on the beach. The waves licked the shore as Olivia posed with Daniel, both smiling for the camera. Yet Daniel's eyes occasionally darted toward her hands, towards subtle gestures she could not fully control. Every laugh shared with friends felt rehearsed, every glance toward Jake like a minefield she had to navigate carefully. Later, as the guests mingled, Daniel pulled Olivia aside near a row of tall palms swaying in the breeze. "You've been distant today," he said softly, concern layered with curiosity. Is everything okay?" Olivia's lips pressed into a tight line. "Yes," she murmured, hoping her voice sounded convincing. She wanted to explain, to unburden herself, but the words were locked behind a wall of fear. One small slip, one unguarded glance, and the illusion would fracture. Daniel studied her for a long moment, eyes narrowing just slightly, as if sensing that invisible barrier between them. He let it pass for now, but the subtle scrutiny lingered like a shadow at her shoulder, following her as she rejoined the crowd. As the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with soft oranges and pinks, Olivia felt the pull of inevitability. The wedding had been beautiful, a flawless performance for family and friends. Yet beneath the surface, secrets whispered and shadows lengthened, threading through the fabric of their new life together. The tension that had begun on her dressing room floor now stretched across the sand, entwining the groom, the bride, and the best man in an invisible web of anticipation and dread. The limousine awaited, ready to carry them toward the honeymoon. Cruise. Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for Daniel's, the faintest shadow of guilt passing across her features. Daniel squeezed her hand, a gesture of love, but also of observation, a quiet warning that the perfect beginning might already be slipping away. The cruise ship loomed over the dock like a floating palace, its white hull gleaming under the mid-morning sun. Olivia's heart raced as she stepped onto the gangway, heels clicking against the metal, the sound echoing strangely in the cavernous terminal, the scent of salt and diesel mixed with the faint sweetness of flowers decorating the ship's entrance. Guests chattered excitedly around them, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing within the newlyweds. Daniel followed closely, his hand brushing against hers occasionally. Not always a tender gesture, sometimes a subtle anchor, a silent check on her composure. Olivia forced a smile, keeping her gaze on the horizon, the endless blue water calling to her with a deceptive serenity. Every laugh, Every casual conversation with other passengers felt like a performance. She was the bride, radiant and poised, yet beneath the satin and pearls, a gnawing anxiety throbbed relentlessly. Their cabin was small but luxurious, with a balcony overlooking the vast, rolling ocean. Olivia sank onto the velvet armchair, letting the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Daniel leaned against the doorway, scanning the room with quiet approval. "It's perfect, isn't it?" he said, a warmth in his voice that belied the careful calculation behind his observation. Olivia nodded, but the truth felt far from perfect. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, and she felt a surge of panic before she could even glance at the screen. A message from Jake, the best man, flashed briefly, its content hidden, but enough to tighten the pit of her stomach. She hid the device under a pillow, forcing herself to smile when Daniel looked her way. "Let's grab a drink on the deck," Daniel suggested. His smile was easy, but his eyes lingered too long, studying the smallest flicker in her expression. Olivia's pulse quickened. She followed, keeping pace as the corridors of the ship stretched around them like a maze, the polished wood and brass gleaming under artificial lights. Each turn felt like a delicate negotiation between public appearances and private panic. On the upper deck, passengers lounged under umbrellas, sipping cocktails, laughter blending with the soft crash of waves against the hull. Olivia sank into a chair, letting the sun warm her skin, while Daniel joined her, handing her a glass. The moment seemed idyllic, just the two of them against the endless ocean. But every glance she cast toward the railing felt like a reminder of her secret's precarious position. Daniel studied her as she sipped her drink, noting the way her fingers tightened around the glass. "You seem distracted," he remarked casually. Yet there was an edge beneath the words, a quiet insistence that she acknowledged the tension between them. "I'm just tired," Olivia replied, letting her voice sound light. "It's been a long morning." Her lie hung in the warm air, unconvincing even to herself. Later, as they explored the ship's winding corridors, Olivia's mind raced. The cruise promised romance, adventure, a perfect honeymoon. But each hallway, each polished railing, felt like a corridor of surveillance. Every laugh from nearby couples, every glance from waiters and staff seemed exaggerated, intensified by her guilty conscience. Daniel's quiet attentiveness pressed on her like a shadow she could not shake, a reminder that the truth could surface at any moment. That night, as the ship sailed away from the Florida coast, Olivia stood on the balcony, wind whipping through her hair, and stared at the darkening waves. The horizon seemed infinite, yet her choices felt impossibly confined. Daniel appeared behind her, his presence silent, a hand resting on her shoulder, warm, reassuring, and yet heavy with unspoken scrutiny. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured, voice low. Olivia nodded, unable to meet his gaze. The ocean stretched endlessly, a mirror for her spiraling anxiety, the beginning of a journey that would test every secret, every truth, every fracture in their marriage. The ship continued its glide into the night, carrying them toward a honeymoon that promised bliss on the surface, but harbored shadows beneath. The corridors below deck were quieter, almost eerily so, the soft hum of the engines vibrating through the polished floors. Olivia walked a step ahead of Daniel, her heels clicking lightly, each sound amplified in the narrow hallway. The shadows of the ship stretched across the walls like fingers reaching for her, and every creak or muted conversation seemed to carry hidden meaning. Her heart pounded, not just from nerves, but from the gnawing awareness that Daniel's eyes followed her more closely than ever. She ducked into the cabin briefly, claiming she wanted to freshen up. Once inside, she retrieved her phone from beneath the pillow and unlocked it with trembling fingers. Messages from Jake flickered across the screen, their content brief but loaded. Inside jokes, reminders of previous secret moments, subtle intimacies that made her pulse race. Olivia's chest tightened. She could feel panic pooling in her stomach. She glanced at the door, half expecting Daniel to step in at any second. to confront her with the quiet accusation that had been building since the wedding. Outside, Daniel's shadow lingered in the corridor, a silent presence she could almost feel even through the door. He was patient, careful, watching for signs, letting her reveal herself in small, telling movements. Olivia tried to steady her breathing, tucking the phone away just as he knocked lightly and entered. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone casual, but the sharpness in his eyes betrayed the question's real weight. "Yes, just needed a moment," Olivia replied, forcing a smile she could feel cracking at the edges. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on adjusting the folds of her dress, as if the fabric could shield her from the scrutiny. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, and after a long pause, he nodded, turning to leave. His attention, however, did not fully release her. The ship's corridors seemed to contract around her as she returned to the upper decks. Passengers mingled in small groups, their laughter and conversation floating through the air, contrasting sharply with the tension that gripped Olivia. She kept a careful distance from Daniel, every step calculated, every gesture measured. She was a bride on display, yet trapped by her own duplicity, the invisible web tightening with each passing moment. Later, while Daniel chatted with crew members about dinner arrangements, Olivia found herself wandering toward the lower deck observation area, a small lounge with panoramic windows revealing the inky black sea beyond. She sat in the corner, shadows pooling around her, and allowed herself a quiet exhale. Memories of Jake surfaced unbidden. A brush of a hand, a private joke, a lingering smile that seemed to haunt her. She hated the power he still held over her, yet could not deny the pull of it, the dangerous allure that had threatened her marriage long before this honeymoon. Suddenly, a faint sound of footsteps approached. Olivia froze, heart hammering. She glanced up to see Daniel appear, leaning casually against the doorway, yet with the sharp precision of a man who noticed everything. "You spend a lot of time down here," he remarked softly. Thinking, Olivia hesitated, searching for a lie that could hold. "Just enjoying the view," she murmured, the truth twisted uncomfortably in her throat. She had been replaying moments she could never share. Daniel's gaze lingered, perceptive and unyielding. He took a step closer, the distance between them charged, unspoken tension threading the air. Olivia felt exposed, the layers she had meticulously maintained starting to unravel. For the first time, she sensed that her secret was no longer entirely hers to guard. Daniel's presence was a reminder that concealment had its limits. The night fell heavy over the ship, the darkened water outside reflecting moonlight like shards of broken glass. Olivia returned to their cabin, her movements slightly more guarded, aware that Daniel followed at a careful distance, watching, always watching. Every whispered conversation, every glance exchanged with other passengers now carried an unspoken weight. As she lay on the bed later, staring at the ceiling, Olivia felt the creeping anxiety tighten into a knot she could not release. Daniel's suspicion had begun to shadow her every thought, a quiet pressure she could not ignore. The honeymoon that promised bliss now teetered on the edge of something darker, a tension that threatened to consume both of them. The first whispers of suspicion had been spoken, though unvoiced, and already the invisible cracks in their marriage were deepening. The next day, the hidden messages, the fleeting glances, and the small betrayals would begin to collide. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's curtains, casting stripes of gold across Olivia's face. She lay awake, mind buzzing with fragments of last night's whispers and Daniel's quiet scrutiny. Her phone rested on the nightstand, innocuous, yet deadly. Messages from Jake had multiplied overnight, each one a subtle claim on her thoughts, her guilt, and the fragile facade she maintained. Daniel, however, had risen before her. Leaning against the balcony railing, he sipped his coffee and stared at the ocean, his expression unreadable. Observant as ever, his eyes flicked toward Olivia without a word. She felt the weight of that gaze, a silent calculation, like a man piecing together a puzzle from fleeting shadows. Breakfast was a tense affair in the ship's dining hall. Olivia moved between plates and polite conversation with the staff, all the while stealing glances at Jake, who laughed easily at a joke from a nearby passenger. The intimacy between Olivia and Jake was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But Daniel noticed. His hand brushed against the silverware, tapping faintly, a nervous rhythm that betrayed the tension simmering beneath his composed exterior. Later, when the ship's crowd had dispersed for the morning activities, Daniel found a moment alone. Olivia had stepped out for a walk along the deck, leaving the cabin empty. That's when he saw it. The unmistakable image on her phone left carelessly on the nightstand. A series of photos, moments he had never witnessed, intimate glances, messages exchanged with Jake in tones far too familiar to be innocent. His heart sank. Each photograph a hammer striking truth into the fragile shell of their marriage. The photographs weren't the only evidence. Text messages spilled secrets across the screen, late-night confessions, inside jokes that only the two of them shared, moments that betrayed the trust Olivia had vowed to uphold. Daniel's jaw tightened, his mind racing to process betrayal, so complete, so intimate, that it felt like a physical blow. When Olivia returned, her smile faltered as she noticed the phone in his hand. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, a mix of fear and defiance. "Care to explain?" Daniel's tone was calm, almost eerily so, but the underlying current of anger and hurt was unmistakable. He flipped through the messages, each one a dagger twisting in his gut. Olivia's eyes widened, and for the first time, she realized the extent of the damage, not just to her marriage, but to the facade she had painstakingly maintained. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, voice faltering. But Daniel's silence cut through the words like a sharpened knife. The room felt smaller suddenly, the cabin walls closing in, shadows stretching long and accusatory. Daniel's mind oscillated between rage and disbelief, the betrayal crystallizing into a cold clarity. He stared at Olivia, the woman he had promised forever to, and saw the cracks, the hidden life she'd been leading. Olivia's own panic escalated. The secret that had once felt manageable now seemed monstrous, exposing her in ways she had never anticipated. She searched his eyes for forgiveness, understanding, anything that could stop the avalanche she had set in motion. Outside, the sun glinted off the waves, serene and indifferent to the turmoil inside the cabin. It was a cruel contrast. The ocean, endless and calm, versus the storm raging between husband and wife. Daniel finally set the phone down, leaning back against the wall, his expression a mixture of sorrow and calculated composure. "We need to talk," he said quietly, every word heavy with meaning. The day stretched on like a taut wire. Each interaction, each glance, weighted with unspoken accusations. Olivia tried to navigate the delicate balance of appearances while internally crumbling under the weight of exposure. Daniel's observation, once subtle, had hardened into a quiet, relentless scrutiny. As night approached, the ship's lights twinkled against the dark water, reflecting the tension that now defined their honeymoon. Olivia's secret was no longer hers alone. The fragile perfection of the voyage had shattered, leaving shadows that would only grow longer, darker, and more dangerous in the days to come. The collision course was set. The truth, once discovered, could not be undone. And somewhere in the shadows of the ship, Jake's presence lingered. A reminder that betrayal had taken a tangible form, and the consequences were only beginning to surface. The ship glided through, calm waters under a morning sky streaked with pale pink and gold. But inside the cabin, tension simmered like a storm waiting to break. Daniel stood by the balcony, leaning against the railing, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the horizon as though it could offer answers that Olivia could not provide. Yet, his mind was elsewhere, tracing every glance, every laugh, every secretive message, reconstructing a betrayal that now had physical proof. Olivia emerged from the cabin, adjusting the folds of her dress for the umpteenth time. Her hands trembled, slightly, a subtle tremor Daniel did not miss. He watched her move down the corridor, the swing of her shoulders, the way she avoided meeting his eyes. Each gesture spoke volumes, feeding the quiet, obsessive scrutiny that had begun to consume him. As the morning wore on, Daniel began shadowing her movements across the ship. They wandered among the sun-drenched decks, past glistening pools and cheerful passengers, yet his focus was singular. Every interaction she had, every laugh she shared with other guests, was filtered through the lens of suspicion. He noticed how her fingers lingered on a railing, how her gaze followed the best man whenever he moved within view. Small gestures, fleeting glances, they became evidence in his mind, signs of the betrayal he could no longer ignore. Olivia, aware of his vigilance, felt panic twisting her stomach. Each step, each word had to be measured. Every misstep risked exposing her secret before she was ready. The cruise, which had promised romance and escape, now felt like a cage, the ship's polished corridors and sunlit decks masking the invisible walls closing in on her. They stopped by the ship's observation lounge, its floor-to-ceiling windows, framing endless blue waves. Olivia leaned against the glass, staring out at the horizon, willing herself to calm down. Daniel approached silently, standing just behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Olivia," he said softly, not yet accusing, but the tension in his voice carried a subtle threat. "I saw the messages. I saw the photos. We can't pretend this didn't happen." Her breath caught, the sound sharp in the quiet space. "Daniel, please," she whispered, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "It's complicated. I never meant to hurt you." He remained silent for a long moment, letting the weight of her words and her guilt settle between them. His gaze was steady, but behind it simmered a complex mix of anger, heartbreak, and something darker. A need for control over a situation that had already spun beyond his understanding. Later, as they wandered the ship's lower decks, Daniel's attention became more intense. He noticed Olivia's subtle hesitations, the way her steps quickened whenever she thought she was unobserved. He began cataloguing these patterns, internalizing each gesture, each whispered conversation she had with passing staff or fellow passengers. Every detail reinforced the growing fissure in their relationship. The cracks in the deck, both literal and metaphorical. Olivia felt the strain keenly. Her secret, once a private weight, now pressed down with the force of exposure. She caught herself glancing toward Jake, whose carefree demeanor mocked the chaos she tried to contain. The invisible web of betrayal seemed to tighten with each passing hour, and she realized that her freedom to maneuver had nearly vanished. As night fell, the ship glimmered under strings of decklights, reflecting like stars on the dark water. Olivia lay in the cabin later, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle hum of the engines. The day had been a delicate balancing act, a dangerous dance between concealment and observation. Daniel's quiet presence had shifted from comforting to oppressive, the cracks in their relationship widening with each passing moment. Somewhere beneath the surface of this luxurious cruise, the invisible fissures threatened to erupt. Secrets, suspicions, and unspoken accusations mingled like a storm brewing at sea. The honeymoon, once envisioned as blissful escape, had become a psychological battleground where trust was scarce and the consequences of betrayal loomed dangerously close. The next day promised escalation, the confrontation, the unraveling, and the moment when the carefully constructed illusions would collide with the unyielding truth. The moon hung low over the ocean, silver and unyielding, casting a pale glow across the deck. Olivia paced near the railing, her fingers grazing the cool metal as she tried to steady her trembling hands. The rhythmic slap of waves against the hull mirrored the pulse of her anxiety, relentless and unforgiving. She could feel Daniel behind her, a quiet shadow on the deck, watching her every move. "Olivia," he called softly, his voice carrying more weight than usual. We need to talk. Now. She swallowed hard, turning to face him, the moonlight revealing the tension etched into his features. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, cutting through the layers of excuses she had tried to weave. The air between them was thick, charged with unspoken accusations and the inevitability of truth. Daniel, I can't keep lying to you, she began, her voice quivering. Her words stumbled, fragile against the magnitude of what she had to confess. There's something you need to know about Jake. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, though he remained silent, allowing her to speak, his presence pressing her forward with both weight and expectation. It happened before the wedding, Olivia admitted, the confession tumbling out like a dam breaking. It wasn't just a fleeting thing. It was serious. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. Daniel's expression remained unreadable for a moment, the quiet before a storm. The waves crashed against the hull, a steady reminder of the world outside and the chaos within. He stepped closer, and for a moment, Olivia feared he would lash out, but instead, he folded his arms, his voice controlled, yet cutting. You kept this from me. All the signs, all the messages, he said, each word deliberate, heavy with betrayal. Do you realize what this means? How it changes everything between us? I know, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. I tried to stop it, but it's complicated. I thought I could. I don't know. Her words trailed off, lost in the night air, swallowed by the ocean. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair and dress, as if nature itself mirrored the turmoil between them. Olivia's chest heaved with guilt and fear, each breath a struggle. The confession had been necessary, inevitable, yet it did not ease the tension. Instead, it amplified it, pulling the edges of their fragile honeymoon toward the breaking point. Daniel stepped closer, so near that she could feel his warmth, his presence pressing into her like a physical weight. You need to understand something, he said quietly, almost to himself. Trust isn't just words. It's every moment, every gesture. You shattered it before we even left Florida. Do you understand what that does to someone? Olivia nodded, tears spilling freely now, the cool night air doing nothing to soothe the burning ache in her chest. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to beg, but the words seemed inadequate, hollow against the gravity of her betrayal. The ship's lights shimmered across the water, painting silver trails that led to nowhere. Much like the path their marriage now seemed to follow, the ocean stretched endlessly, indifferent to their pain, and Olivia realized with a sinking clarity that some truths, once revealed, could not be taken back. Daniel exhaled slowly, stepping back just enough to give space, yet never breaking the intensity of his stare. We can't just pretend anymore, he said, voice low, firm, and final. Everything changes tonight. Olivia looked at him, her hands trembling, her mind racing. The honeymoon, the dreams of bliss, the imagined perfect future. They had all been illusions. Now, under the pale moonlight, the marriage she had promised, the vows she had spoken, felt fragile and uncertain, balanced on the edge of exposure, guilt, and rage. She swallowed again, attempting a calm she did not feel. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice barely audible over the crash of waves. The silence that followed was oppressive, a heavy prelude to the days ahead. Outside, the ocean continued its endless march, reflecting moonlight and shadows alike, carrying them forward into a journey neither of them could control. A path defined by secrets, confessions, and the dangerous unraveling of trust. The ship's corridors felt narrower that night, the warm glow of the lights casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch like dark fingers. Olivia moved quickly, heels clicking against the polished floor, trying to evade the tension that had thickened since her confession. Daniel followed behind, his steps quieter, deliberate, a predator pacing in measured silence. Each glance from him burned, a reminder that the fragile balance of their honeymoon had shattered. The cabin door loomed ahead, its simple wood finish suddenly menacing. Olivia pushed it open, entering the space she had hoped would serve as sanctuary. But Daniel was already there, standing rigid by the balcony, his eyes sharp and calculating. The moonlight streamed in through the glass, illuminating the lines of betrayal etched across his face. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but charged, every word resonating like the crash of waves against the hull. Every touch, every smile, all of it was a performance. "Do you realize what that does to someone you promised forever?" Olivia's throat constricted, the panic she had kept at bay all day now spilling over. "Daniel, please. I didn't—" "You didn't." "What?" he interrupted, stepping closer, the tension between them taut, like a cord stretched to its breaking point. "Tell the truth before it's too late? Admit what you've been hiding? Or worse, continue pretending it's all fine?" Her voice shook. "I told you everything. About Jake. Everything." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Do you hear yourself? Everything? Or just what you thought I could handle?" Olivia stumbled back, bumping into the dresser, her fingers clutching the edge for balance. The room seemed to close in on her, the soft hum of the ship's engines replaced by the roaring pulse in her ears. Daniel's gaze followed her every movement, unrelenting. He could see the guilt, the fear, the betrayal all etched into her posture, her trembling hands, her faltering breaths. "You've ruined us," he whispered, a dangerous calm settling over him. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you chose him." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, blinding her. "Daniel, I never wanted this, never wanted to hurt you. Please. We can fix this. Talk. Talk?" His voice rose, raw and jagged now, a dangerous edge slicing through the tension. "After the truth, after the lies, after everything you've done." He stepped forward, closing the distance, his hand trembling slightly, the weight of betrayal manifesting in a way that made Olivia's skin crawl. The moment seemed suspended, the air thick and oppressive. The balcony beyond beckoned, the waves crashing below like an unheeding audience to the unraveling drama. Olivia's mind raced. Escape routes, excuses, apologies, but nothing could bridge the growing chasm between them. Daniel's fingers brushed against the edge of the dresser as he steadied himself, eyes fixed on hers, a mix of grief, fury, and obsession in his stare. "You made a choice," he said quietly, the calm before the storm. "And now we face the consequences." Olivia's knees weakened, and she sank slightly, clutching her stomach, her voice barely audible. "Please, Daniel, don't." The room became a cage. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering with the ship's subtle motion, reflecting the chaos consuming them. Daniel's hand rose slowly, as if to touch her, to confront, to punish. Olivia's eyes widened, a flash of terror breaking through her tears. In that suspended moment, the fragile veneer of their marriage shattered entirely. The truth, once confined to whispers and texts, had erupted into a living, breathing confrontation that neither could control. The ship outside sailed calmly into the night, indifferent to the human storm raging within its walls. And somewhere, in the periphery, the invisible presence of Jake, the best man, the catalyst of betrayal, hung like a phantom, a reminder that secrets, once revealed, carried consequences far heavier than the heart could bear. Olivia's breath hitched, Daniel's shadow loomed, and the room held its breath, poised on the edge of irrevocable action. The honeymoon, the promises, the perfect beginning, all teetered at the brink of destruction, ready to plunge into the darkness neither of them could escape. The moonlight streamed through the cabin window, casting long silver stripes across the room, glinting off the polished surfaces like shards of broken promises. Olivia's hands trembled, gripping the edge of the dresser as Daniel advanced, his expression a storm of grief and fury. The words they had exchanged earlier reverberated in the confined space, each one a sharp strike, each confession a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Olivia backed toward the balcony, the floor beneath her swaying slightly with the gentle roll of the ship. Panic surged through her chest, constricting her lungs. "Daniel, please, just let's talk," she begged, her voice breaking, laced with terror. But the quiet intensity in his gaze told her there was no room for negotiation, no safe harbor from the tidal wave of betrayal he felt. "I trusted you." Daniel's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and raw. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away with him." His hands clenched, and Olivia flinched, sensing the danger that had lurked in the shadows all night. The moonlight reflected in his eyes, revealing not just anger, but a cold, calculating clarity. Her mind raced. Flight seemed impossible. The corridor was distant, the deck beyond the balcony just out of reach. The phone lay forgotten on the nightstand, useless now, a silent witness to her exposure. She thought of Jake, the catalyst of this catastrophe, and a fresh wave of panic washed over her. The betrayal that had begun as whispers and messages now took form in the room with her, alive and menacing. Daniel stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Each footfall echoed in the cabin, amplifying her terror. "You made your choice," he said, softly, voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "And now, we face the consequences." Olivia's voice trembled. "Daniel, don't, please." Her words hung in the air, fragile and powerless. The room seemed to shrink, walls pressing closer, shadows twisting as if eager to witness the collapse of trust and love alike. Daniel's hand moved toward her, not hesitantly, but with the inevitable force of someone who believed that betrayal demanded reckoning. In that suspended moment, time slowed. Olivia felt the cold brush of metal as she slipped, the slight imbalance, sending her staggering back. Daniel reached for her instinctively, but too late. The movement, a culmination of rage and panic, became fatal. A scream tore from Olivia's throat, sharp, piercing, echoing against the cabin walls, swallowed by the dark water beyond. Blood bloomed across her dress like a violent flower, stark against the pale fabric. Daniel stood frozen, horror and disbelief etched into his features. The consequences, once abstract, now manifested in a brutal, undeniable reality. The honeymoon, the perfect beginning, the vows, all dissolved in a single, irrevocable moment. Outside, the ship sailed onward, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding within its walls. The waves crashed softly against the hull, oblivious, unfeeling. Guests continued their celebrations, laughter drifting from distant decks, completely unaware of the nightmare that had erupted behind a closed cabin door. Daniel's hands shook as he knelt beside Olivia, her body trembling, life slipping away. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the crimson stains spreading across the floor. "Olivia, I didn't mean—" His voice broke, words failing him. The gravity of what had occurred pressed down like the weight of the ocean itself. In her final moments, Olivia's eyes met his. The fear, the love, the betrayal, all intertwined in one fleeting gaze. No words could bridge the chasm that had opened between them. No apology could mend the shattered remnants of what they had once shared. The secret that had started with whispers and messages had escalated into something irreversible, consuming everything in its path. As she lay there, Daniel cradling her in trembling arms, the stark realization settled over him. Love had been betrayed, secrets had been exposed, and vengeance, even unintended, had carved a permanent scar. The honeymoon, meant to celebrate a beginning, had ended in death. Outside, the moon reflected on the endless ocean, indifferent, cold, and unyielding, a silent witness to the destruction wrought by passion, betrayal, and the fragile human heart. The Call to the authorities came quietly, almost reluctantly. The Coast Guard received the signal first, an encoded distress transmission sent from the yacht's emergency system. By the time the officers arrived, the ocean had already taken on the air of a silent witness, its waves rolling indifferently under the pale wash of dawn. Daniel stood at the deck's edge, shoulders hunched, the mask of confidence he had so carefully worn now fractured beyond repair. The flashing lights of the patrol boat approached, and with them came the weight of inevitability. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. There would be no more lies to hide behind, no more stories to invent. The IDSA investigators boarded swiftly. Their presence was clinical, efficient, yet to Daniel, it felt like judgment itself had climbed aboard. "Sir," one officer said firmly, "step away from the rail." Daniel turned slowly, his face a grim canvas of sleepless nights and unraveling thoughts. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It wasn't supposed to be this way." The officers exchanged wary glances, but said nothing. They led him toward the cabin where the search began. Papers scattered, Olivia's belongings carefully bagged, fragments of a life cut short. Each drawer pulled open felt like an incision into his conscience, exposing what he had buried. And then the revelations came, bit by bit, like tidewater uncovering shells. Olivia's phone contained voice notes, unsent drafts, a meticulous collection of thoughts she had never spoken aloud. There were letters too, folded tightly in the lining of her suitcase. Together, they painted a portrait far more vivid than Daniel ever allowed himself to see. In those words, Olivia's heart beat again. One recording began with a hesitant breath. "If you're hearing this, I'm afraid it means I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I loved him. I did. But love isn't meant to be a prison, is it?" Her voice cracked, heavy with longing, heavy with disappointment. Secrets corrode everything, and he had too many. Daniel pressed his palms against his ears, but the recordings echoed louder in memory than in reality. He could not stop them, not anymore. Another message revealed her quiet strength. "I stayed because I believed he could change, but people only change when they choose to, not when they're cornered. And Daniel always ran from corners." The investigators listened in silence, noting every word. For them, it was evidence. For Daniel, it was a trial of the soul. One officer closed Olivia's journal after reading aloud a final passage. "Even at sea, justice finds its way, not always through courts or cells, but through truth-breaking surface, refusing to drown." Daniel's composure faltered. His knees gave way, and he sank to the floor of the cabin. The sea rocked beneath the yacht, mirroring the storm inside him. "I tried to protect us," Daniel whispered, though no one asked. "I thought if I kept the truth hidden, we'd survive. But the lies, they grew teeth." A young investigator studied him, unblinking. "Protecting someone doesn't mean burying who they are, or who you are." Daniel's lips trembled. He wanted to argue, but the words collapsed before they reached his tongue. The yacht, once a symbol of power, now felt like a coffin drifting on open water. Every corner carried Olivia's absence, and every discovery sharpened her presence. Narration carried the silence. The investigation was not merely about law or order. It was about the stories left behind, the truths people tuck into journals, messages, and unspoken fears. Olivia's voice reached beyond her death, not as an accusation, but as testimony. In the dim light of the cabin, Daniel faced her, if not in body, then in essence. He could no longer rewrite her, could no longer twist her into a version that suited his pride. What remained was her honesty, preserved like salt on the ocean wind. The Coast Guard prepared to escort him ashore. Daniel rose shakily, wrists bound, eyes hollow. The sea stretched out around him, vast and indifferent. As they led him away, the narration lingered like a tide pulling back. Love, when betrayed, does not vanish. It lingers in echoes, in the weight of secrets too heavy to carry. And secrets, like storms, always break, no matter how deep they're buried. The patrol boat cut through the waves, heading for the mainland. The lights of the shore glimmered faintly ahead, promising courts, headlines, judgment. Yet behind them, on the abandoned yacht, Olivia's words remained, etched into every page, every recording, every silence. Justice, like the sea, had found its current, and the story was not finished. The patrol boat cut steadily through the waves, carrying Daniel toward the mainland, but the investigation did not end with his arrest. The yacht remained anchored, a floating archive of unspoken histories. Inside its cabin, investigators sifted through documents, photographs, and voice memos, pieces of a puzzle that suggested the truth stretched far beyond a single night at sea. Narration rose like a tide. Relationships rarely unravel in a single instant. They fray over years, pulled apart by threads too thin to notice until they snap. What the authorities uncovered were not just Olivia's last words, but echoes of her entire life with Daniel, shadows stretching backward into their past. A folder tucked beneath the mattress revealed financial ledgers marked with discreet transfers. Notes in Olivia's handwriting explained them. Payments to cover debts. Promises he would change. Promises I wanted to believe. They spoke of a man drowning long before the sea ever touched him. An older recording, her voice softer, almost affectionate, whispered through the cabin. Daniel isn't cruel. He's afraid. Afraid of losing face. Afraid of losing me. But fear makes people crueler than malice ever could. Investigators exchanged glances. What began as a criminal inquiry was now a portrait of a marriage balanced on secrets, family, expectations, and fragile pride. In a separate box, faded letters surfaced. They revealed Daniel's childhood, the pressure of a father who demanded excellence, a family name that carried weight but little compassion. Olivia had written in the margins of one letter, "He learned to lie before he learned to cry. Maybe that's why he doesn't know the difference anymore." Flashbacks flickered across the narrative. Daniel as a young man at family dinners, nodding silently while his father's booming voice filled the room. Olivia, years later, standing beside him at charity galas, her smile masking a private grief. These were the silent rehearsals that shaped their final tragedy. One investigator muttered, "This isn't just about fraud or betrayal. It's about survival. Both of them, in their own way." Another replied, "And yet, survival doesn't excuse destruction." Their words hung in the air like verdicts unspoken. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in silence aboard the patrol boat, wrists bound, eyes cast on the black horizon. He was not remembering the arrest, nor Olivia's final recordings, but something much earlier, the first time she said she loved him. The memory burned brighter than any accusation, and it cut deeper than the cold bite of steel cuffs. The narration circled back, pressing the audience to reflect. Love is not erased by betrayal. It lingers in every corner of memory, haunting even as it condemns. Olivia's truth was not only about Daniel's lies, but about the silence she carried, the compromises she made, and the sacrifices neither could admit aloud. The investigation closed for the night, yet the sense of finality never came. Questions lingered, unresolved. Had Olivia planned to expose him long before the voyage? Had Daniel truly loved her, or only the idea of her loyalty? Was betrayal born in a single act, or nurtured over years of half-truths and suppressed confessions? The sea outside remained calm, as though mocking the storm that lived within every piece of evidence. Justice might come in court, but understanding, the true reckoning, would always drift just out of reach. And so, their story did not end with judgment, but with ambiguity, with echoes,